Hello everyone, tonight we're going to travel back in time, not to the grand castles, not to the royal banquets, but straight into the mud-slick, flea-ridden kitchens of medieval Europe, where dinner often resembled prison slop more than anything edible. Imagine yourself trudging home from the fields soaked with rain, your fingers frozen your stomach hollow, and the one thing waiting for you, a thick grayish bowl of gruel. This wasn't the kind of porridge you'd find topped with fruit and almonds in modern breakfasts. No, this was barley or oats boiled until mushy, sometimes in water, sometimes in a weak ale, if you were lucky, and salted just enough to not make you cry. You sit down in a smoky, thatch-roofed hovel, and your wooden spoon hits the bowl with a dull thud. The steam carries no sweet scent, just damp grain and despair. It's hard to appreciate the sheer monotony of peasant diets in medieval Europe. For many, this was the main meal twice a day, every day. The grain might change rye, oats, barley, or wheat if the harvest hadn't failed, but the preparation rarely did. You boiled it. You stirred. You hoped it didn't stick to the pot. You prayed it didn't smell funny. And then you ate it because there wasn't anything else. One odd thing historians still debate is whether gruel was ever meant to be enjoyed. Some argue that monks and penitents might have considered it virtuous to consume something so bland, so basic, that it reminded them of life's impermanence. Others claim peasants spiced it up with anything available: onions, herbs, maybe a splash of sour ale, though frankly, spicing it up in 1323 likely meant throwing in a wilted garlic leaf you found under a log. And it wasn't just about taste, it was survival. Grain was cheap. Grain kept. You could store sacks of it for months, and while it might develop weevils or mold, you could pick out the worst bits and still cook the rest. You might be chewing more bug than barley, but hunger had its own flavor. The cooking process was often communal. You might take your turn at the village oven or share a pot with your neighbors. And yes, sometimes that meant questionable hygiene. The same spoon might be used by every mouth in the room. The same pot scrubbed with straw, if at all. You probably burned the bottom at least once a week. And on feast days, you added a pinch of salt. Luxury. Now let's talk about texture, because this was not creamy oatmeal. It was sticky. It clung to your bowl like wallpaper paste. If it cooled too much, it congealed into a mass you could slice. In fact, some people did slice it. Cold gruel slabs made easy on-the-go food. No need for plates, forks, or teeth. Just pick it up and gnaw. There's an old English saying, "No man is better than his pottage." That tells you a lot. Pottage or gruel was the food of the people, common, constant, inescapable. You could dress it up by adding root vegetables, maybe some lentils or wild greens if it was spring. But even then, the foundation was the same slow-boiled grain. If you lived in a monastery, gruel had another function discipline. Monks embraced the bland. A meal that required no pleasure to eat freed your soul, supposedly. You focused on prayer, not pleasure. But even the monks sometimes cracked. Records show special dispensations were occasionally granted for garlic, for eggs, even for cheese. And on feast days, sometimes they got butter. Butter. Now that's sinfully delicious. Jokes aside, it's worth imagining the psychological effect of eating the same thing every day. No variety, no spice, no surprise. If dinner was different, it was probably because something had gone wrong. Your gruel was burnt, your oats were moldy, or someone had forgotten to salt the pot. You didn't look forward to it. You just accepted it the same way you accepted your calluses or the rats under your bed. And yet it wasn't all bleak. People found comfort in routine. Children grew up with the same flavors. Old women had tricks for making it a bit better, stirring longer, boiling slower, adding a splash of yesterday's broth if any was saved. And when times were good, maybe you crumbled a crust of old cheese on top. Maybe a merchant passed through with a pinch of pepper. Maybe your neighbor shared a marrow bone. Still, don't romanticize it too much. Tonight, you're eating the basic version. It's barely salted, slightly overcooked, and cooling fast. You hold the bowl close for warmth, squinting through the smoky haze of the hearth. Somewhere outside, a dog barks. The wind groans through the shutters. You dip your spoon again. One bite, then another. Chew, swallow, stare at the wall. This is dinner. Still better than starving. There's something haunting about the uniformity of this dish across centuries and countries. England, France. Germany gruel knew no borders. It was as universal as mud and taxes. And while the wealthy dined on birds and pastry and wine-poached pears, you got your gray mush and counted yourself lucky. Oh, and remember, there were no forks, just spoons. Wooden, splintery spoons often carved at home passed down or swapped between siblings. You might wipe yours on your tunic before eating. You might not. Cleanliness wasn't a priority. Calories were. One of the stranger things that happened around gruel was its use as medicine. Yes, if you were sick, you were told to eat thin gruel. Because nothing screams healing like watered-down porridge. Even doctors of the time swore by it. Gruel for fevers, gruel for toothaches, gruel for childbirth. There was even a belief that gruel cleansed the stomach as if boiling barley could realign your humors. Today, gruel is a joke, a shorthand for bland, miserable food. But back then, it wasn't funny. It was life. And oddly enough, it worked. You're still alive, aren't you? You lean back now. Your bowl's empty. Your breath fogs in the firelight. You scratch at your sleeve. Outside, the rain begins to patter again. Tomorrow you'll eat the same thing, and the next day, and the next. But for now, you're full. Well, full-ish. You wake up cold, aching, and still hungry. The gruel from last night has already faded from memory, replaced by the rumble in your stomach and the stiffness in your joints. You stretch, rub your eyes, and realize the morning meal awaits, if you can call it that. The menu, a crust of stale bread soaked in sour ale. Breakfast of champions. You sit by the low table, no chairs, of course, and your fingers close around the hard wedge of rye. It's not moldy, just aged. Dry as old leather, and nearly as chewy. You dunk it into the ale. It fizzes slightly, a flat, sour brew that would make modern beer snobs weep. This isn't a party drink. This is medieval Gatorade. It hydrates, provides calories, and possibly doesn't kill you. Possibly. This dish, if we're being generous, is called sops. A common way to soften stale bread, often with broth or milk. But you're no noble. You're a laborer, maybe a plowman, maybe a tanner, and milk isn't part of your morning. Ale is. You drink it at breakfast, again at lunch, and once more before bed. Not to get drunk, although that might happen, but because water isn't trustworthy. Historians still debate whether medieval water was truly unsafe across the board. Some argue that well water in villages was fine. Others claim that rivers and streams were so full of waste that drinking from them was a gamble. But whatever the truth, beer became the beverage of choice. Even children drank it, albeit weaker versions known as small beer. So, here you are sipping your sour ale, gnawing on a softened bread lump and contemplating the day ahead. Your bread was probably baked days ago, if not weeks. It's made from rye barley, or a mix of both, depending on what your local grain supply looks like. Wheat, that's for rich folks. You might see it once or twice a year baked into golden loaves for Easter or a noble's wedding feast. But for you, the daily grind quite literally means coarse flour full of husks and grit. There's a reason so many medieval peasants had bad teeth. The grinding stones used to mill grain often left tiny flecks of stone dust in the flour. Over time, that meant worn-down enamel-chipped molars and mouthfuls of pain, and you still had to chew the bread unless you soaked it. There's a certain humility to the act. You take what would otherwise be trash old dried-up bread and give it new life through liquid. Ale softens it. Broth warms it. Even water, if you dare, can do the job. This isn't cuisine, it's engineering. How to extract the last usable bit from what you've got. Sometimes your sop might come topped with something, an egg if you're incredibly lucky. Maybe an onion slice, a dab of goose fat, or a scrape of old cheese. You stare at the wall while eating, lost in thought. How many mornings have started like this? How many more will? The simplicity of it becomes routine. Your body expects the chew, the bitterness, the rush of calories. And maybe, just maybe, you start to find comfort in the sourness of the ale, the way the bread dissolves slowly as you chew. It's not good, but it's familiar. Now let's talk a little about the bread itself. You didn't bake it. Your neighbor might have. Or the village baker whose oven is the only real heat source large enough to handle loaves for multiple families. Baking at home was rare unless you had access to an oven or hearth that could maintain heat. And even then it took time, fuel, and skill. There's a story from 13th century France where villagers complained about the baker's prices. He was watering down dough, cutting it with sawdust, or undercooking the loaves. Sound awful, sure. But bread was that essential. It wasn't just food, it was the food. You didn't go a day without it, and when famine hit, bread riots weren't uncommon. Which brings us to ale. Your drink, your broth, your disinfectant. Ale in the medieval period wasn't the hoppy, carbonated stuff of modern pubs. It was more like liquid bread. Thick, nutty, often sour, and most importantly, unfiltered and low in alcohol. You'd need several mugs to get tipsy, and by then you'd probably be too full to care. There's an odd detail you remember: your cousin once got sick after drinking bad ale. Not bad like expired bad, like tainted during brewing. Maybe the yeast was wrong or the water hadn't boiled long enough. He vomited for days and swore off ale. For a week. Then he was back sipping slowly, bread in hand. Because what else could he do? Sometimes in winter you'd flavor your ale with herbs, not for fun, but to mask off tastes. Juniper, wormwood, yarrow, even pine needles. The results varied wildly. And then, of course, there were the brewing accidents, mold exploding barrels, or someone forgetting to skim the foam. You drank anyway, because thirst doesn't wait for perfection. Here's something light. One time your friend tried to toast a slice of bread on a stick over the hearth, thinking he'd recreate the sop, but fancy. The bread caught fire. He tried to blow it out and set his own tunic smoking. You both laughed until your bellies hurt. The toast tasted awful. You ate it anyway. These little rituals, the dunking, the sipping, the chewing, become part of your morning rhythm. You watch the light filter through the wooden slats, casting lines on the dirt floor. You hear someone chopping wood outside. A rooster crows far too late. And you finish your sop, drain the last of your ale, and breathe in the morning chill. No bacon, no butter, no fresh coffee, just bread and beer. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve and stand creaking like a barn door. The fields await. The work never stops. But at least your stomach isn't empty anymore. Your stomach is already rumbling again by mid-morning, but lunch isn't a fresh loaf or a warm stew. No, it's another serving of grain, but this time the grain is tinted red. You glance down at the pot bubbling away at the edge of the hearth. It smells metallic, faintly of iron, and something vaguely animal. That's because today's porridge has a special ingredient: pig's blood. Welcome to the world of blood and oats, a staple in many corners of medieval Europe, especially during the lean months when meat was scarce, but hunger wasn't. The animal's gone, the butcher's done, but nothing goes to waste. You've scraped out every ounce of usable meat, and now you're boiling down the life left behind. Don't gag just yet. In fact, this dish is still around in parts of the world, often as black pudding or blood sausage. But right now, for you, it's simpler, just fresh blood stirred into oats or barley, while still warm, thickening the whole mixture into something you can chew, swallow, and survive on. You take your first bite and pause. The flavor isn't bad, just intense, earthy, rich in a way. The texture is familiar but heavier than breakfast gruel. You taste the iron. It coats your tongue, clings to your spoon. There's salt, of course, and maybe a hint of thyme if someone was feeling generous. Otherwise, this is protein at its most direct. Historians still debate whether this was truly a peasant dish or a byproduct of butchering days served to farmhands before the good cuts were salted and packed away. In any case, for you, it's normal. You've eaten worse. You've definitely eaten less. Your neighbor once joked that blood porridge was food for the strong, and by that, he meant those strong enough not to faint while stirring it. It needs constant attention, or it clots too fast. You can't walk away from the pot. One moment you're seasoning it, The next it's curdled like spoiled pudding. The animal is long gone now. A hog most likely. Slaughtered in the early morning before the frost lifts. You remember the sounds, the snorting, the squealing, the final gurgle. Then the rush to catch the blood in a basin to stir it fast so it doesn't coagulate on the spot. Some people add vinegar to slow the clotting, others just work quicker. Children don't usually eat this. It's an acquired taste even for adults. But it fills the belly and delivers more nourishment than boiled cabbage. When the winter bites, blood porridge can keep you warm. There are rituals to this too. Some households add onions or leeks to tame the flavor. Others mix in bits of offal or stale bread. If you're lucky, there's a drizzle of cream, but that's rare. Mostly it's oat, salt, blood, and heat. You remember one spring when the blood ran thin. Too many mouths, too few hogs. The porridge was mostly oats and water with a smear of dried blood for color. It didn't taste like much, but it kept you upright. And that's what mattered. Today's version is better. You eat slowly, spoon by spoon, savoring the thickness. It's not about enjoyment, it's about endurance. There's a strength in eating this, a quiet pride. You're using everything, wasting nothing, eating nose to tail, as the modern food writers would say. Except for you, it's not a philosophy, it's just Tuesday. There's a moment halfway through where you consider the color. Deep, rusty red, almost black where it's cooled at the edges. It looks like something a physician would drain, not serve. But you shake off the thought. Your hunger overrides your doubt. Still, you've heard tales. People who ate too much too quickly and fell ill. Children who cried at the sight of it. Priests who condemned it during fast days, though privately they might have had a bowl themselves. The church always had its loopholes. Blood was sacred in some circles. In others it was taboo, but here it's lunch. One joke you've heard more than once: what's red warm and keeps you from dying? The answer isn't wine. As you eat, a memory floats up: your grandmother stirring a pot just like this one, humming to herself, her hands never stopping. She'd taste it with a wooden spoon and nod once like a soldier satisfied with her weapon. Strong food, she'd say. Makes strong bones. You never questioned her. Later, you'd see dogs licking the dirt where the basin had been emptied. They knew something you didn't: calories are calories no matter how they come. The pot is nearly empty now. You scrape the bottom, not out of greed, but out of habit. Waste nothing. Clean the spoon. Set it beside the fire to dry. You feel the warmth blooming in your stomach, and it's not unpleasant. It might even be comforting. There's nothing left but silence now, the kind that follows a meal eaten without talking. You didn't speak while you ate. No one does. Not because it's forbidden, but because it's unnecessary. This food doesn't require commentary. It demands silence and slow chewing. And when you rise, stretching your arms toward the low beams of the roof, you realize you're not quite full, but you're satisfied. There's work to do. The firewood needs chopping. The pigs need feeding. The blood will run again. You rinse your bowl with snow, wiping it dry with your sleeve. The red streaks fade into your clothes unnoticed. Another meal done. Another day begun. You've eaten your porridge, you've drunk your ale, and now the pot simmers again over the hearth. The scent wafting through the cold air is underwhelming. It doesn't smell bad. It just doesn't smell like anything. You lean in, hopeful. Maybe someone added leeks. Maybe garlic. Maybe... Nope. It's just water, barley, and the ghost of a turnip. Welcome to the world of medieval cooking without spices. If you're from the modern world, you're used to food with flavor layers of sweet, sour, salty umami all dancing across your tongue. But here in this cottage, this village, this century, you're lucky if your stew tastes like boiled hope. It's not that medieval people didn't want flavor. They did. They wrote cookbooks about it, dreamed about it, stole recipes from the Arabs, the Romans, the French. But spices were expensive, astronomically so. Pepper was a status symbol. Cloves were as valuable as gold. Nutmeg, forget about it. Only the wealthiest lords had cupboards stocked with saffron, cinnamon, and cardamom, and they locked them tighter than their coin purses. Historians still debate how often common folk actually got their hands on spice. Some records suggest occasional access through market day trades or monastery kitchens, while others insist it was almost entirely out of reach for anyone not dripping in silk. For you, a peasant with mud-caked boots and a patched tunic, spices live in the same realm as unicorns. So you make do. Your stew is flavored with what's around, maybe some leeks if they survived the frost, a handful of parsley or wild garlic if it's spring. In summer, you might dry mint or lovage. In winter, you might just pray. Salt is your savior, but even that can be hard to find. And expensive. You've licked your thumb after salting bacon just to taste it. But tonight's stew, no salt, no herbs, just simmered barley and root vegetables if there are any left. You sit by the pot watching it bubble. You give it a stir more out of habit than hope. The wooden spoon creaks against the pot's edge. You taste. It's warm. It's wet. That's about all you can say. And yet you eat, not because it's delicious, but because it's fuel. You have to work tomorrow, and the next day, you're not a knight. You don't feast. You endure. There's a story your uncle told once. He went to a wedding at the manor house, served a slice of goose stuffed with raisins and cloves. He said it made his eyes water and his mouth burn. He didn't like it. Too strong, he said. Too strange. Maybe that's how flavor works when you live without it. It becomes too much when it finally appears. Still, you experiment when you can. You boil nettles for tea. You burn onion skins for color. You mash apples into stew to give it a tang. It's a game of resourcefulness, not creativity. Because even when you grow something flavorful, onions, leeks, mustard, you often trade them for other things. Wool, tools, beer. But if you were rich, your meals would drip with saffron and pepper. Your pies would steam with cinnamon. Even your sauces would sparkle with crushed almonds, dates, and ginger. The cookbooks say so, but you're not reading cookbooks. You're reading the bottom of your pot. You remember once years ago your cousin came back from a pilgrimage. He carried a tiny pouch of pepper wrapped in cloth like a sacred relic. You used it for Christmas dinner, a single grind over the stew. It made your tongue tingle. You all wept. Then it was gone. And now, tonight you chew your way through another bland spoonful and wonder what it would be like to eat something exotic. To taste something you didn't grow yourself or trade for at the market. To bite into a dish and not know exactly how it was made. That mystery is a luxury you can't afford. Your stew finishes cooking. You ladle it into rough earthenware bowls. The kids eat quickly. No one complains. Complaining means less. They know the rules. Eat what's given. Don't ask questions. You smile when the baby smacks his lips. He doesn't know better. To him, this is just how food tastes. You envy him a little. And here's a light joke. Your neighbor once tried to make his own spiced stew by dumping in handfuls of dried flowers. His entire family spent 2 days groaning on the floor. Turns out, not all flowers are edible. The ones that are don't help much either. Outside, the wind howls. The thatch above your head shifts slightly. The stew cools in your bowl. You scrape the last bits, not wanting to waste even a grain. You lick the spoon. It tastes of wood and smoke. Some days someone sneaks in a miracle. A pinch of wild sage, a sprig of marjoram. You cherish those moments. You remember them. But tonight is just another bowl of nothing served warm. You sleep heavier when you've eaten, even when the food is flavorless. You lay down near the hearth, pull a woolen blanket over your shoulders, and let your eyes close. Tomorrow maybe someone will catch a rabbit. Maybe someone will bring salt from the coast. Maybe you'll find garlic under the thawing soil. Or maybe you'll eat stew again. Just like this. Just like always. You wake to the smell of something sharp, something alive. At first you think maybe something's gone off. Perhaps a spoiled turnip, or rotting meat. But no, that's breakfast. Someone's brought out the cheese. Not the smooth yellow wheels you might know from modern kitchens. Not the kind that melts gracefully over bread or bubbles atop soup. No, This cheese is hard-cracked at the corners and crawling literally. You eye it with suspicion. Someone cuts a wedge. It wriggles. A maggot falls onto the table. Bon appetit. This is cheese that bites back, and yes, it was real. In fact, in certain regions of Europe, Sardinia, especially cheeses like casu marzu, are still made today using living larvae to break down fats and give the cheese its signature creamy texture. Back in the Middle Ages, it wasn't quite a delicacy, it was just what happened when you stored cheese long enough without wax or modern refrigeration. The milk comes from goats or sheep curdled using rennet made from a calf's stomach. It's pressed into molds, salted, and left to age in dark corners of the pantry. Over time, little visitors arrive. They lay their eggs, and soon the cheese pulses with movement. You don't throw it away. You eat around the bugs, or depending on the region, you eat the bugs too. Your first bite is intense. The flavor is sharp sour, a little fizzy on the tongue. It stings slightly like biting into black pepper mixed with vinegar and grass. You chew slowly, trying not to crunch. The texture varies. Some parts are creamy, others rubbery, and a few still bounce under your teeth. Historians still debate whether maggot cheese was considered an everyday food or a result of poor storage conditions. Some claim it was accidental, eaten out of desperation. Others suggest it was deliberate. Maggots help ferment the cheese faster, and people grew to like the flavor. Either way, you're chewing it now, and it's not the worst thing you've had this week. You think of last year's summer fair when a traveling merchant brought a wheel of Dutch cheese coated in herbs. It smelled sweet, earthy, nothing like the pungent brick on your plate now. That cheese was gone in minutes, sliced and traded before it even warmed to room temperature. You haven't seen anything like it since. Back to your cheese. You take another bite, ignoring the twitch near the edge. The trick you've learned is to eat it quickly. Don't let your mind catch up to your nose. Don't think about the wriggling. Focus on the sharpness, the salt, the way it fills your belly. Your cousin once tried scraping the maggots off his wedge. They jumped, right off the plate. He screamed. Everyone laughed. That's the danger. They can launch themselves. Up to 15 centimeters, they say. Your cousin wore a cloth over his food after that. But you're braver now. You eat what's in front of you. And this isn't just peasant food. Even some nobles, on rare occasions, indulged in strong cheeses. Court records mention wheels gifted between lords, sometimes aged until the outer rind was nearly black. One chronicler even described a cheese that smelled like the feet of a soldier after Lent. A compliment, perhaps. You spread some of yours on a crust of bread, hoping to balance the flavor. It doesn't help. If anything, the sourness intensifies. You sip a bit of ale to wash it down. That helps. Sort of. Your children watch you eat. One asks for a piece. You hesitate, then break off a smaller wedge, checking it for squirmers. It's cleanish. He chews carefully, makes a face, swallows, then grins. You grin back. This is survival training, medieval style. There's a warmth to the cheese, a strange comfort that grows with each bite. Maybe it's nostalgia. Maybe it's the alcohol content. Some cheeses, believe it or not, ferment enough to give you a light buzz. Or maybe it's just nice to eat something that didn't require boiling for 5 hours. You finish your meal, wiping the last smear from your plate. One maggot remains. You flick it away with your spoon. It lands on the table and writhes briefly before going still. You don't flinch. This is your world. Food isn't pretty. It's not plated. It's not filtered through a lens for likes. It's sustenance. Sometimes it crawls, sometimes it stinks, but it gets the job done. And hey, at least it's not gruel. You hear the barrel being opened before you smell it. That creaking lid, the groan of old wood against iron bands. Then there it is. A scent so sharp, so acrid it curls your nose hairs and stings your eyes. It smells like vinegar mixed with seawater and something left too long in the sun. You know that smell. It means dinner is almost ready. Tonight's special is stockfish. Not just any fish, aged, dried, and sometimes fermented beyond recognition. This is the medieval staple that made its way from the cold northern coasts into pantries across Europe. You'd recognize it immediately hard as wood, pale and completely odorless until it's soaked, pounded, and boiled back into life. Then it comes alive again in the worst way. The fish, likely cod caught and split open to dry on open racks under Nordic winds, arrives at your village in wooden bundles, traded through fishmongers or shipped inland by cart. It's cheap protein, durable, practically immortal. You can keep it for years and it won't rot, it just petrifies. Historians still debate whether medieval people actually enjoyed eating stockfish or merely tolerated it. Some argue it was prized during Lent and fasting periods, while others see it as culinary punishment. Either way, you're having it tonight, and there's no getting out of it. You hammer the fish first, literally. Before you can even cook it, you have to soften it. The dried slabs are so tough they could double as shields. Some people soak it for 3 days. Others beat it with hammer stones or the back of an axe. You opt for all 3. Eventually, it gives in. You boil it in weak ale water alone won't mask the smell and toss in whatever herbs are left from last week's bundle. A bay leaf, maybe a garlic stalk. Nothing fancy, just enough to pretend you're in control. Then comes the eating. You spoon the fish into your bowl. It's pale, stringy, flaky in a way that isn't entirely pleasant. You take a bite. The texture is chewy, almost rubbery. The flavor is intense, salty, bitter, a hint of ammonia if you're unlucky. And you're unlucky. This isn't fresh fish. It's not pan-fried trout or roasted salmon. It's survival food made to last, not to delight. You chew and chew, trying to break down the strands. They resist. You chew harder. Your jaw starts to ache. Still, there's comfort in familiarity. You've eaten this since you were a child. Your grandmother served it with mashed turnips. Your mother added it to barley stew. You've even had it with honey once at a harvest celebration. It didn't help. Once your neighbor tried baking it into a pie. The result was like biting into a leather pouch stuffed with seaweed. The crust burnt, the fish steamed. Everyone choked it down and smiled politely. No one asked for seconds. There's a rumor in the village that the bishop's cook once threw stockfish into a fire by accident and claimed it was a blessing. The bishop never noticed. He was fasting anyway. You sip some ale between bites. It helps, sort of. You tear off a hunk of dark rye bread, scrape the fish onto it, and chew. It's easier that way. The bread blunts the worst of the texture. Your teeth still ache. Despite everything, you understand why stockfish was valued. It traveled well. It fed armies. It kept bellies full when meat was forbidden. You've heard it said that some towns built their economies on it, and for good reason. It's reliable, predictable, lifeless. The smell, though, that's something else. Even after the meal is done, it lingers in the air on your hands and your clothes. The scent clings to the thatch roof. You'll be reminded of it tomorrow and the day after that. And let's not forget how it was prepared in different regions. In some places, they'd ferment it on purpose. Let it soften in its own juices until it developed that signature ammonia tang. The Norwegians still do it. You've heard whispers of lutefisk, a version soaked in lye. You've never tried it, and you're not sure you want to. One time, a visiting merchant dropped a sack of stockfish on the ground. It didn't bend, it snapped. A piece flew into a goat's pen. The goat sniffed it and walked away. Even the goat had standards. You finish your bowl. The fish is gone, the bread's stale, and the ale's warm. You burp and the flavor returns. Fish. Still there. You sigh. It's going to be a long night. Outside, the wind has picked up. Someone's scraping a pot. A dog whines in the dark. You wipe your hands on your tunic and lean back against the cold wall. You survived another meal. It wasn't good, but it worked. And tomorrow, if you're lucky, there might be a fresh onion in the stew. But probably not. You wander outside at first light, scouring the edges of the village where the earth hasn't been trampled into mud. The air is sharp clean in that wintry way, but it carries no scent of anything edible. Still, your fingers brush aside the brittle grass, and there they are, tufts of green pushing up defiantly from the frost. Bittercress, dandelion, sorrel. Your haul for today's salad. No lettuce, no cucumbers, no tomatoes. Those are foreign luxuries, some of them unknown to your century. What you have instead are weeds, and lots of them. Welcome to the medieval salad, a medley of whatever grew wild, didn't sting, and didn't kill you. It was a common sight on peasant plates, especially in spring, when winter stores ran low and gardens hadn't yet caught up. The bitter leaves were boiled, chopped, or served raw with a splash of vinegar if vinegar was available. Otherwise, they were just eaten plain. Crunchy, peppery, and almost certainly unwashed. You chew the first bite and flinch. Sorrel, sharp as a slap. It pulls the moisture from your tongue and floods your mouth with the taste of metal and lemon peel. Dandelion follows, earthy, fibrous, a bit like chewing grass after a rain. You keep going. You have to. Historians still debate just how much greens featured in the peasant diet. Some say salads were daily fare. Others argue they were fillers when food was scarce. But the truth seems to fall somewhere in between. These weren't salads in the modern sense, not light accompaniments or health food. They were necessity greens. Filler, fiber, anything to keep your stomach distracted. Your mother taught you which plants were safe. Your neighbor, old and half-blind, once ate a sprig of wolfsbane and lost 3 days to visions and vomit. You don't make that mistake. You pluck chickweed wild mustard lamb's quarters. Your fingers are numb from the cold, but you gather enough for a bowl. Back in the cottage, you lay the greens out on the table. A splash of vinegar from a cloudy earthenware jug gives them some bite. You even crush a garlic bulb and smear it across the rim of the bowl, more for the scent than the flavor. Garlic is precious. You stretch it thin. You eat in silence, crunching slowly. There's no meat, no bread, just weeds and hope. The textures clash, slimy, stringy, woody. One leaf scratches your throat on the way down. You cough, then swallow more. Still, you're thankful. These plants mean spring is coming. You survived another winter. The earth is waking up, and the food, however bitter, is green again. Your youngest spits out a bite. Too sharp, she says. You nod. That means it's good. She frowns and chews again because there's nothing else. One time you remember you were gifted a handful of almonds. You chopped them fine and sprinkled them on your salad. For a brief moment, it was glorious. You pretended you were in a noble hall. You pretended the salad had a name. You pretended. There's a recipe from a distant city, a salad of watercress, raisins, nuts, and honeyed vinegar. You've never had it, but someone told you once. You try to imagine the sweetness, the softness. It's impossible. Your greens are dry. Your bowl is cracked. Your vinegar burns the back of your throat. A neighbor stops by and drops off a handful of wild leeks. Found by the stream, he says and winks. You nod solemnly. These are gold. You slice them, thin, sprinkle them over the bowl like spice. The flavor stings your tongue in a new way, almost exciting. Medieval people didn't throw much away, and weeds were no exception. Even flowers made it into salads sometimes, violets, marigolds, primrose. Not for beauty, but because they were edible. Your cousin once served a flower salad at midsummer. Everyone smiled, but it tasted like perfume and wilted linen. You find a beetroot buried deep in the larder, wrinkled, soft in spots. But you peel and shred it, mixing it into the greens. It adds color red bleeding into green. Now it looks almost festive. You smile. One light moment, a village boy once tried to trick his sister by mixing in nettles. She screamed, slapped him, and refused to eat salad for a week. You've all been stung before. But this time, the greens are clean, safe, just bitter enough to keep you awake. You eat slowly, deliberately. The children crunch beside you. No one talks much. That's how it is with food that isn't meant to be enjoyed, just survived. Still, the bowl is emptied. A good sign. You rinse it with rainwater, scrape the remnants into the chicken pen. Even the birds hesitate before pecking. Then hunger wins and they peck anyway. Outside, the sky is clear. The ground is softening. Soon other plants will sprout: fennel, horseradish, celery, maybe even peas if the frost holds off. But for now, it's salad made from leaves your neighbors walk over. And somehow, it fills you. The day has passed in a slow haze of work and wood smoke. Your hands are raw from hauling water. Your back aches from bending over frozen soil. But tonight is different. There's a kind of electricity in the air, an anticipation that hums through the cottage like a song remembered from childhood. Tonight there will be meat, not scraps, not bones for broth, not dried fish or blood-thick porridge, actual honest-to-goodness meat. Stringy, tough, and roasted until half-charred, but still a cause for celebration. You watch as the mutton is placed on the spit. It's an old sheep, probably no longer good for milk, its bones thin beneath its pelt, but no one complains. The smell as it begins to roast is enough to make your mouth water. Fat sizzles and drips into the fire. Smoke rises. Even the air tastes better. Historians still debate how often medieval peasants actually ate meat. Some say once a week, usually a small portion shared among many. Others believe it was rarer, reserved for feast days, weddings, or payment in kind. But for you tonight, it's real, and it's yours. You gather with the others sitting close to the hearth. Children crowd forward. Even the dog knows something special. Your stomach growls, but you wait. Meat isn't rushed. It's turned slowly, carefully. Salt is rubbed in. Maybe a few herbs are pressed into the cracks if someone thought ahead. The smell alone is a feast. The sheep's leg turns golden, then brown, then nearly black at the edges. It crackles and pops. You remember the last time you had mutton midwinter 2 years ago after a neighbor's animal broke its leg on ice and had to be slaughtered. You had one bite. It was enough to dream about for months. There's a joke someone always tells when meat appears. Careful, don't chew too fast, you might get used to it. Everyone laughs, and then someone else says, save the bones for soup. Because you always save the bones. The meat is sliced thin carefully. Everyone gets a piece. Not enough to fill your belly, but enough to savor. You take your share, warm, greasy, slightly overcooked. You bite in. It resists at first, then yields with a grainy tear. The flavor explodes. Salt, smoke, fat. It coats your tongue, fills your nose, reaches behind your eyes. You chew, slowly closing your eyes. This is what luxury feels like. Not because it's tender, not because it's rare, but because it reminds you what eating could be. You remember a passage from a traveling monk who once wrote that a feast makes the poor man weep with joy, and the rich man sleep with guilt. You don't weep, but for a moment you don't feel poor. Your piece is gone too quickly. You suck the juices from your fingers. You tear off a piece of bread to mop up the drippings on your plate. You consider licking it. You wouldn't be the first. One child starts gnawing on the bone. No one stops her. That's half the meal, the marrow inside the scraps, along the ridge, the crackle of burnt skin. Later, the bones will go into a pot. Tomorrow's gruel will taste faintly of tonight's feast. That's the real reward flavor that lingers. A neighbor tells a story about a noble feast he once glimpsed while delivering firewood. Whole boars roasted, their mouths stuffed with apples, pies taller than a child, sauces the color of gems. He didn't eat any. He wasn't allowed near the table. But he remembers the smells. You all nod. Smell is enough sometimes. Meat like this binds the village together. You trade labor for it, favors stories. You remember who gave, who shared, who saved you the best bit of skin. Trust is measured in portions. Friendship in marrow. One time, someone tried to sneak a second slice before the carving was done. He got caught. He had to clean the privy for a week. No one's tried it since. The fire crackles. The last of the meat is pulled from the spit. The bones are stacked neatly ready for boiling. The smell lingers like incense. You sit back full but not stuffed, satisfied in a way that only scarcity can teach. Your fingers shine with grease. You wipe them on your tunic without thinking. It smells like home now. Outside, the stars are sharp. The cold presses in, but you're warm. You've eaten meat. You smile. You awaken to cold. Again, but this time, it's the kind of cold that's crept into your bones. The hearth's gone out overnight, and your breath fogs the air like smoke. Your stomach grumbles before you even sit up, but you already know what's coming. It's the same as yesterday, and the day before, and the month before that. Turnips. Again. Not the sweet kind, not roasted or caramelized, just boiled, mashed, or if you're lucky, baked under coals. They're pale, fibrous, and vaguely peppery. You've eaten them so often they've invaded your dreams. You once saw one shaped like a face and laughed until you cried. Or maybe cried until you laughed. It's hard to tell now. In the dead of winter, turnips are what's left. The potatoes haven't arrived yet, not for another few centuries. Carrots, beets, and other root vegetables are gone or spoiled. The onions have sprouted, but the turnips, they endure. They sit stubbornly in the cellar in baskets lined with straw, waiting to be peeled and boiled again. You rise and go through the motions. You stoke the hearth. You fetch water. You peel the turnips with a dull knife, the skin curling off like papery bark. The smell is earthy damp and faintly sour. You drop them into the pot and wait. Historians still debate whether peasants actually ate only turnips in winter, or if it's just a convenient stereotype. But your life, your stomach, it says yes. When everything else runs out, when salt meat is gone, when beans are too dry to boil, you have the turnip. It doesn't rot easily. It grows in poor soil. It asks nothing of you, and it gives even less in return. You remember the tricks. Add a spoonful of lard if you have any. Mash it with some ale if you're feeling reckless. Bake it on hot stones for something different. Fry slices in a pan if there's leftover grease. But these are rare luxuries. Most days, you boil and eat. You think of your grandfather, who used to call it the root of misery. He said he once tried to plant turnips in a circle around the house, so that no matter where he walked, he'd remember how poor he was. He laughed when he said it. He always laughed at the saddest things. Still, you eat. The first bite is soft, mushy, bland. The second bite has texture fibers that pull against your teeth. The third bite is just there. It exists. It fills space. The children groan. Turnips again, you nod. They pout, they eat. This is not the time for complaints. There's no alternative menu, no hidden feast. One child tries to pretend the turnip is meat. It's roast goose, she says, holding it up on a stick. Everyone laughs. You join in. It's funny because it's not true, but pretending helps. You once heard a noble say turnips were for the pigs. He wasn't wrong. You've fed them to pigs. You've fed them to yourself. You've fed them to each other. They cross every line of class and dignity. But not all turnip dishes are punishment. Your neighbor once made a kind of cake from grated turnip flour and honey. It was dense, weirdly sweet, and caused some confusion, but no one hated it. You think of it fondly. You haven't had honey since. You remember another time last harvest when you had a big crop. Too big. You buried baskets in the ground, wrapped them in hay, hid them from rot. For a moment you felt rich, a turnip tycoon, but the feeling fades when you're eating your 6th bowl in a row. There's a saying, winter ends when the last turnip dies. You're not sure if that's hope or despair. Today you spice things up. You toss in some cracked barley, maybe a sliver of dried apple. The flavors fight each other, but at least they're trying. You eat the bowl clean. Then you take what's left in the pot and fry it, pressing it into little cakes over the coals. The edges crisp. It smells almost appetizing. Someone walks in and asks what it is. You shrug. Still turnips. But this time there's pride in your voice. You chew the crispy edge. It crackles. It's not much, but it's different. You might do this again tomorrow. Outside, the frost clings to the window slats. You hear the dog scratching at the door. The snow is heavy this year. The stores are low, but you've got turnips. still. And that means you're doing all right. You've heard the rumor all your life. Everyone has. Somewhere, someone once cleaned a chicken with urine on purpose. The tale floats through the village like a bad smell, a medieval whisper passed from hearth to hearth, always accompanied by a wrinkled nose and a chuckle. But tonight, as you pluck feathers from a scrawny hen, the question crawls back into your mind. Did they really do that? The bird is small bones sharp under thin skin. You're not even sure it qualifies as a meal. It looks more like a snack with feet, but it's all you've got. And as you pull the last of the downy tufts from its neck, you remember the story a cook, a jug of aged urine, and a promise that it made the meat tender, even flavorful. Historians still debate the truth of it. There are records, some vague, some specific, of urine used in medieval households for tanning leather, whitening laundry, even setting dyes. But did it touch dinner? Some say yes, claiming that stale urine with its ammonia content was a kind of rudimentary cleaning agent. Others scoff, insisting the tale is exaggerated or misinterpreted from alchemical texts. But you've seen stranger things. You once watched a man rub raw meat with vinegar and ash. Another time, someone bathed fish in milk for 3 days. People will try anything if they think it'll keep food from turning or make a chewy bird less like a shoe. Tonight, you do not follow the rumor. You wash the chicken with cold water, scrape away the grit, and trust the fire to purify what your hands can't. But the thought lingers. What if it worked? What if that sour old trick turned stringy flesh into something soft and savory? You truss the bird with rough twine, place it on a spit, and start the long rotation over the hearth. Fat drips slowly. The smell builds and your stomach growls. It's a delicate balance. Cook it too fast and the skin burns while the meat stays raw. Too slow and it dries out into something not even dogs would fight for. You turn it carefully, humming as you go. It's the kind of patience only hunger can teach. A neighbor stops by, sniffs the air, and raises an eyebrow. Smells clean, he jokes. You both laugh. You don't mention the rumor. Once at a spring fair, you saw a noblewoman eating chicken basted in almond milk and saffron. It glowed golden under the sun, and the scent was warm and sweet like spiced silk. You asked what it tasted like. She didn't answer. She didn't even look your way. Your bird doesn't glow. Its skin darkens into patches of brown and black. The legs twitch as tendons shrink. You slice off a wing to check for doneness. Steam rises. It's ready. You set the bird on a wooden plate and divide it quickly. The breast goes to the oldest, the thigh to the youngest. You get what's left rib meat thin and a little tough. You chew slowly. It's dry, but it's meat. And for that you're grateful. As you gnaw on a wing, the memory of the rumor creeps back again. You picture a medieval cook in a smoky kitchen grinning as he pours a yellow liquid over raw poultry, whispering secrets only his dog knows. It's absurd. It's disgusting. And yet it makes a weird kind of sense. Your cousin swears he saw a recipe once written in a crumbling book that called for aged chamber water to revive the fowl. He tried it. Once. He won't talk about it. You don't ask. Tonight's chicken was simple. Salt, garlic, and fire. You ate every bite. You even cracked the bones to suck out the marrow. Nothing was wasted. Not the skin, not the charred tips of the wings, not the tiny heart nestled inside the cavity. That's food. That's respect. And maybe that's why the rumor exists. Because when you live in a world where nothing is wasted, every possibility, no matter how vile, gets tested. Urine, vinegar, mud. If it might stretch a meal, make something tender, or fool the tongue into believing it's rich, you try it. You stare at the empty plate. The chicken is gone. Only bones remain. You pile them carefully, already thinking of soup. Tomorrow someone will bring it up again, over ale or by the fire. You know they'll say, "I heard they used to wash chickens in." And the sentence won't even need to finish. Everyone will groan. Someone will gag. Everyone will laugh. But no one will say it's impossible. You wipe your hands on your tunic and lean back. The hearth glows, the fire pops, and the air smells of smoked garlic. and faintly maybe, just maybe, a secret you'll never quite confirm. You smell cinnamon, just for a moment before it fades back into the thick, sour, sweet air of the cookhouse. But it was there. Not on its own, though. It came riding the steam of something else. You peek into the hearth pot and do a double take. There, bubbling under a flour crust and glistening with lard, is a pie, a proper one. You sniff again. Is that pork? It is? But the cinnamon wasn't a mistake. And that sweet tang, that's raisins, maybe dates, maybe apples. Either way, you've just been served one of medieval Europe's most baffling delights, a sweet meat pie. You take your seat and stare at your sliced, steaming and fragrant crust flaking like ash from a torch. Your tongue doesn't know what to expect. Is it dinner? Is it dessert? Is it a prank sweet and savory? Weren't strangers back then. In fact, they were best friends. Historians agree that many medieval dishes blurred the line: pork with plums, chicken with sugarfish cooked in honey and vinegar. Spices like cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg weren't pigeonholed into puddings. They were weapons of status, flavor, and preservation used whenever the cook wanted to impress or mask something unpleasant. You cut a bite with your knife. The crust crunches buttery but rough. The filling oozes. It's rich, sticky. The pork is soft, probably boiled before baking. The raisins have plumped up and burst like tiny flavor bombs. There's pepper, too, and ginger. A riot of tastes all at once. Your brain is confused, but your mouth, it's intrigued. You chew slowly, then take another bite, and another. Your neighbor once said it's like eating a plum cake that insults you. You didn't understand what he meant until now. There's sweetness, yes, but beneath it, salt-fat meat juices. Every forkful changes. It's strange. It's good. Then it's weird again. You've never had anything like it. There's a reason dishes like this existed. Meat was often preserved in dried fruit and spice to help disguise spoilage. Some cuts were aged too long. Others had turned just enough to raise questions, but not enough to stop the meal. A thick layer of spices and sugar kept everyone's noses busy. But that wasn't all. This kind of cooking, this deliberate clash of flavor, was fashionable. The noble courts adored complexity. The more flavors they could pack into a single dish, the more sophisticated they believed it was. Recipes from the 14th century cookbook Form of Curie list combinations that sound more like magic spells than meals. Of course, you're not eating in a noble's hall. You're sitting on a wooden bench beside a fire, licking syrup off your thumb, while someone pokes the coals behind you. But someone somehow got their hands on raisins, cinnamon, ginger, and pork, and made a pie. You ask where it came from. A cousin brought it from the next village. A baker there made a dozen for a wedding, and this one was left over. A gift for helping repair the thatch roof last month. You nod grateful. Thatched roofs rarely repay you with cinnamon. Your children devour their slices, licking their fingers. One says, "It tastes like dinner and a dream." You ruffle his hair. He's not wrong. You glance at the last piece. You should save it. For tomorrow, or for the neighbor who's sick. But your hand moves before your brain argues, and it's gone. Even the crust is devoured. Even the burnt edge. You sit in silence afterward, the fire dancing shadows across the walls. You think about how flavor used to mean survival, how salt, vinegar, smoke, or sweetness weren't luxuries but lifelines, how sugar might be rare but hunger was constant. Then someone burps. Everyone laughs. A light joke. This pie confused my teeth. Another, I think the pork forgave me halfway through. A third, I'd fight a night for another one. You all laugh harder. Because even strange meals can feel like joy. There's a warmth in your belly now, not just from food, but from comfort. From the reminder that the medieval kitchen, for all its grit and grime, knew how to surprise you. That taste wasn't always monotony. That sometimes it was magic. You stack the wooden plates, scrape the last crumbs into a bowl for the pigs, wipe the table with a rag that smells like onion and thyme. And as you lick your fingers one last time, you think you'd eat that pie again. Weird or not. The sausage arrives on the table with no introduction. No garnish, no ceremony. Just a thick, blackened tube slick with grease resting on a wooden plate stained from years of similar meals. You know it before you even cut it. You've had it many times. This is black pudding, a dish as old as your grandmother's stories and as stubborn as winter itself. It's made from blood. You know that. Everyone knows that. You don't ask whose, but today it's pig. Always pig if you're lucky. Mixed with barley oats or breadcrumbs, whatever's around to bind it. Then it's seasoned sometimes with pepper or nutmeg and stuffed into a length of intestine before being boiled, smoked, or fried until it darkens to a near inky hue. You slice it with a dull knife. The casing splits. Steam escapes. Inside, the filling is crumbly dense and nearly black. You fork a piece into your mouth. It's earthy, rich, metallic. A mouthful of mineral and grain laced with warm fat. Not everyone likes it, but you've learned to. Black pudding is not a treat. It's a ritual, a survival tactic, a way to honor the animal and the season. Every part used, nothing wasted. When you slaughter a pig, you get more than chops and belly. You get blood, and blood must be used quickly before it clots. So you stir, you salt, you mix, and you boil. Historians still debate how far back this practice goes. Some trace it to ancient Rome, others to Celtic Britain. But no matter the origin, it has stuck particularly in rural Europe. In fact, it's one of the few medieval recipes that survives nearly unchanged to this day. You remember your first time helping. You were a child. The butcher showed you how to keep the blood moving in the bowl so it wouldn't set. Like stirring a dream, he said, a very red dream. You didn't sleep well that night. But now it's familiar, almost comforting. You eat more. The casing pulls a bit as you chew. There's a hint of pepper this time. Someone had spice to spare. You savor it. The pudding isn't elegant. It crumbles in the mouth, leaves a film of fat on your lips, lingers on the tongue like a secret. But it fills you in ways few foods do. It's dense with energy. One slice carries you through hours of work. Your cousin once tried making it without grain. Just blood and fat. It was awful, like biting into an overcooked sponge. Everyone pretended to like it. No one asked for seconds. You sip ale between bites. It helps cut the richness. The dog stares up at you, whining. You break off a small piece, careful to avoid the casing. He wolfs it down, tail thumping. There's a warmth in the room now. The fire crackles. The sausages sizzle on the edge of the pan. Everyone's talking louder, laughing more. Blood pudding does that. It wakes people up. One of the older women mutters about the church. Not allowed on fast days, she says. Too much blood. You nod. The rules are strange. You can eat fish. You can eat eels, but not blood, not meat. Still, most people bend the rules when no one's watching. You've done it. You'll do it again. There's another joke passed around the fire, black pudding, because breakfast should remind you you're still alive. You chuckle. There's truth in it. Your plate is nearly empty. You scrape the last crumbs with bread. The grease has soaked through. You don't care. This sausage is a story of necessity, of creativity, of not letting anything go to waste. In a world where hunger is always one failed harvest away, you learn to eat what's offered, even if it bleeds. The pot still simmers, more pudding inside. You'll save some for tomorrow, maybe fry it with turnips, maybe just eat it cold. You clean your knife, wipe your mouth, and lean back. The pudding is gone. You feel solid, anchored. You're sitting at the table again, but this time there's a small clay bowl in front of you. It holds a thick brown liquid, pungent, glossy, and flecked with bits of something unidentifiable. You hesitate. Then you pick up the spoon and stir. The smell intensifies, sharp and sour with a dark undertone that hits the back of your throat. This, my friend, is garum fermented fish sauce, and tonight you're drizzling it on your meal like it's the finest olive oil in the world. It's not. It smells like rotting anchovies, like seawater that's been trapped in a wine barrel too long. But somehow, people love it. People crave it. And if you're being honest with yourself, you kind of do too. Garum was a Roman invention, or so the stories say. They made it by packing small fish guts bones heads and all into vats of salt and letting the whole thing rot in the sun for months. Eventually it would liquefy, and the result would be strained, bottled, and sold at absurd prices. The fancy stuff was aged. The cheap stuff sold from buckets. And now, centuries later, long after the empire has crumbled, you're still using it. Not every day, not even every month, but when you can get your hands on it, when a merchant from the coast brings a jar inland, you guard it like treasure. You pour a thin line over your cold barley mash and immediately regret using so much. The smell is overwhelming. But then you taste it, and it changes everything. The mash is still bland, the texture is still gluey, but now there's depth, salt, umami. You wouldn't know that word, of course, but your tongue does. It's the taste of something old and powerful, like the sea boiled down to its darkest essence. Historians still debate whether garum was common in the Middle Ages or a relic of ancient Rome. Some say it faded after the fall. Others argue it evolved into anchovy pastes or other local ferments. But here in this bowl, it's alive again. You remember the first time you had it. You were a boy, and the fishmonger spilled some on a crust of bread. You nearly gagged, but hours later you wanted more. The smell haunted you. The taste lingered. Tonight's batch is strong, maybe too strong. Your eyes water a little, but you keep eating. Garum hides things. It covers rot. It softens bitterness. It brings life to dead food. In a world without refrigeration, that makes it a miracle. Some say nobles used it to fake freshness. Others say peasants used it to endure decay. Both are probably true. You once saw someone rub it into dried meat and swear it turned it tender. Another time someone dropped it into a stew by mistake and ruined the whole pot. The stuff is tricky. It demands respect. Your cousin says he tried to make his own once, buried a pot of fish and salt behind the stable, forgot about it for 6 weeks, dug it up, opened the lid, and passed out from the fumes. The pot is still there. No one goes near it. You finish your bowl. The flavor clings to your lips, your fingers, even the air around your head. You'll smell like garum until tomorrow, maybe longer. The pigs outside start to snort. Even they recognize the scent. You wonder if they'd eat it. You wipe your hands on your tunic and take a deep breath. It doesn't help. Still, you're satisfied. The meal may have been humble grain water scraps, but the garum made it feel like something else. Like a glimpse of a better life. Like a taste of ancient power. You smile, not because it was good, but because it was different. And in a world of turnips and dry bread, different is everything. You're leafing through a book not yours, of course. It belongs to the priest. But today he let you hold it for a while, and your calloused fingers gently turn the thick vellum pages, careful not to smudge the ink. The script is dense, spiky. The illustrations are bright with powdered gold. You're not reading it so much as gawking at it, because this isn't a Bible, it's a cookbook. Sort of. The recipes you see aren't instructions, they're fantasies. Dishes you've never tasted with ingredients you've never heard of. Peacock wrapped in gold leaf. Swan roasted and redressed in its own feathers. Fish molded into the shape of a castle. Bread dyed green with parsley juice and shaped like frogs. Almond milk soups, saffron-sweetened cakes, and glazed quails stuffed with dates, pine nuts, and ginger. You blink trying to imagine the smells, the colors, the people who eat like this. You know you'll never taste these things. They're written for a different world, a different class. This is what we now call the lies of medieval cookbooks. Historians point out that many surviving medieval recipes weren't everyday guides for cooks like you. They were written by or for noble households, collections of aspirational cuisine, not practical fare. The ingredients were rare, the instructions vague, measurements were inconsistent, and much of it was performance. Food as theater, cookery as courtly display. You remember the time a traveling noble's kitchen set up outside the manor for a feast. You snuck through the hedges and watched them at work. Dozens of servants moving in a dance, plucking birds, pounding almonds into milk, boiling sugar, arranging pastries into sculptures. It was surreal, like watching gods prepare a meal for other gods. And here you are huddled over a wooden table with a hunk of barley bread and a lump of turnip. You're not jealous. Not exactly, but you are curious. The book's recipes mention things you don't have. Saffron, rice, ginger, cinnamon, even sugar, which is so expensive it's locked in chests. Almonds too, which only appear in your village once or twice a year. And wine, not the rough cider you drink, but real wine, thick and red-aged in cellars you'll never see. You look at a dish called compost of fish. It calls for trout dates, onions, wine vinegar, and sugar all boiled together. You wince. Then you laugh. Then you squint, wondering if it would actually work. Another recipe describes making a fake hedgehog by shaping meatballs into a mound and sticking almond slivers into it as quills. You wonder, was it meant to be eaten or just admired? You remember the village baker once tried copying a noble pie he heard about. He dyed the crust with beetroot and carved a bird on top. It collapsed in the oven. Still tasted fine though. There's a joke passed around your village. If the cook needs a book, the dish needs a priest. No one really trusts these recipes. They're written by people who don't cook, or if they do, they don't do it with muddy hands and smoky firewood. Still, you don't give the book back right away. You run your fingers along the margin of a page where a hand, steady, smooth, clearly, not a laborer's, has drawn a little pear colored in green and gold. You've never eaten a pear. Not a real one. Only wild crab apples, sharp and sour, picked in secret from the edge of a field. You wonder what it would be like to hold a ripe soft pear in your hand and just bite into it. There's a recipe for blaumanger, a sweet almond and rice pudding with shredded chicken. You read it twice. Chicken and pudding. Together. Again, that strange blend of savory and sweet that seems so common in these pages and so rare in your life. A boy peeks over your shoulder. "What's that?" he asks. You hesitate, then say a story. Because really that's what this book is. A fairy tale written in flour and spice. You give the book back to the priest. He nods and tucks it away under cloth out of the damp. You know you won't see it again for a long time. That night you make your usual soup. Onion barley, maybe a bone if you're lucky. But as it simmers, you do something new. You crush some dried flowers and sprinkle them in, not for flavor, for color. Then you carve a crude pattern into the bread crust, just lines. Nothing fancy. You eat quietly. The soup tastes the same. The bread too. But something about it feels a little different. Maybe cooking isn't just about food. Maybe it's also about dreaming. You're walking in the woods, hunched beneath the trees, scanning the ground with eyes trained by hunger and experience. The sun is low, slanting through the branches, and your breath fogs in front of you. In one hand is a rough basket, in the other a stick you use to poke through fallen leaves and lift tangled undergrowth. You're looking for mushrooms. Some are dinner, some are death. And in medieval Europe, you often didn't know which was which. You spot a cluster beneath a rotting log, plump gray, almost inviting. But you don't move too quickly. You kneel. You sniff. You check the gills. You recall the shape, the sheen, the stories. Then you back away. You're not sure. And not sure is another word for dead. It's a gamble every time. Mushroom hunting was a common necessary practice for peasants across Europe. They grew wild and free, no need to plant or tend. But they came with risk. Historians still debate whether people in the Middle Ages had a consistent, accurate method for identifying edible mushrooms. Some say knowledge passed down through oral tradition was incredibly precise. Others argue it was a game of dangerous trial and error. You've heard the tales. A family that ate white-capped mushrooms after rain and never woke up. A monk who went blind after chewing on a pretty red one. A shepherd who swore by a test rub the mushroom on silver, and if it tarnishes, it's poison. But then again, he died last year. You don't trust silver. You trust your gut. Eventually you find a patch of chanterelles, small, yellow, funnel-shaped. You recognize them instantly. Their scent is faintly peppery, almost like apricots. You smile carefully, pluck them, and place them in the basket. They'll go well in the evening stew. You keep walking. The forest is silent but watchful. A squirrel darts through the leaves. A crow cackles overhead. You feel like a thief in nature's pantry. Back at the cottage, you clean your haul with a damp cloth. Never wash them in water. That's what your mother said. They soak it up like sponges. You cut away anything soft or bruised. The smell intensifies a deep, savory musk. You slice them thin and toss them into a pan with fat rendered from last week's bacon. They hiss and curl, releasing their scent into the smoky kitchen. You add onions, maybe garlic, maybe a shred of dried thyme if you're lucky. The result is magical. The mushrooms shrink to half their size, dark and golden. The fat glistens. You dip a crust of bread into the pan and taste. Earthy, rich, slightly nutty. The flavor feels ancient. You serve them over mashed turnip. The children cheer. One says, "It tastes like the woods," and he's right. It does. You remember one man in the next village who grew his own mushrooms in barrels in the cellar. He had names for them. Knew them by touch, by smell, by spore. People called him odd, but he never got sick. You envied him. Then again, you knew someone else who tried the same thing and fed his entire household death caps by mistake. They say he died with a mouthful of dirt, still trying to vomit it up. You joke sometimes that the mushroom gods flip a coin every time you cook. Heads you eat, tails you pray. One night, years ago, you tried a mushroom you didn't recognize. It was smooth white, almost glowing in the moonlight. You cooked it anyway, ate 2 bites, spent the rest of the night curled on the floor, sweating, shaking, seeing stars where the ceiling should be. You survived. Barely. You still dream about that ceiling sometimes. You've gotten better since then. Wiser, cautious, and yet curious. There's something rebellious about wild food. It grows without permission. It feeds without warning. It laughs at your gardens and your granaries. It offers, then dares you to take. You finish the meal and wipe your plate clean. The children are full. The fire is warm. You lean back and feel the satisfaction of a dinner earned with your eyes and hands. You'll go out again tomorrow. Maybe you'll find more. Maybe not. Maybe something will find you. But tonight, the mushrooms were kind. It's morning and your lips are dry. Your breath is sour. You reach for the wooden mug beside your sleeping mat. Not water, never water. You tilt it back and swallow warm, flat ale. It tastes like yesterday. Welcome to medieval hydration. Water you see is not your friend. It comes from the stream, the well, the rain barrel, and all of those can make you sick. People have whispered stories for generations about cholera, dysentery, and fevers that come from water too clear to trust. So instead, you drink ale, all day, from morning till night. Even the children, not to get drunk, to stay alive. And it's not the good stuff. It's small beer, barely alcoholic, cloudy, barely fermented. But it's brewed. It's boiled. It's safer than what comes out of the well. You finish the mug, and the bitterness clings to your tongue. You've built a tolerance to it, to everything. You remember how the brew is made. Barley soaked and mashed, boiled in huge vats, then strained. Hops aren't always used, those are for fancy people or bigger towns. Your ale is flavored with what's around herbs, bitter roots, maybe a few dried berries if you're lucky. You let it sit, wait for it to bubble, then bottle it in jugs sealed with cloth. It doesn't last long. A few days, maybe a week. After that, it sours into something unpleasant. You drink it anyway. Historians still debate how dangerous medieval water really was. Some believe it depended heavily on geography. In mountainous regions with fast-running springs, water might have been safe. In crowded towns, a gamble. But for you, even if the well runs clear, there's a dead rat floating in your imagination. And that's enough. Today's breakfast is leftover bread dipped in ale. Again, you chew slowly, The crust softens. It's not delicious. It's not fresh. But it's wet and warm, and that's something. You remember once as a child sneaking sips from a visitor's bottle. Real mead honey wine, thick and golden. You thought it was magic. It was sweet, sharp, burned your throat. You smiled for an hour. You haven't had it since. Wine exists too, but only in church or noble halls. You've tasted it once. Sour, strong red like blood. You preferred the mead. Sometimes you mix things. Ale with herbs, ale with eggs, ale warmed over fire with butter and spices if someone's sick and you want to coax them back to life. You've heard of beer soup. You've made it. Once. It was worse than it sounds. One joke you've heard: a sober man in winter is a dead man in spring. Everyone laughs, then drinks. Today, someone suggests trying the stream near the woods again. You frown. Last year, your cousin's boy drank from it. He was feverish by nightfall, vomiting by morning, buried by week's end. That's not a story. That's memory. You make your own ale now. Everyone does. It's part of life. Like bread, like firewood. You mark your days by how many jugs are left. And when you run out, you boil water just in case. You strain it through cloth. You say a prayer. You drink and hope. There's a moment in every day when the ale hits your bloodstream just enough to soften the edges. Your knees ache less. Your back loosens. You feel present. Not drunk. Not dull. Just slightly distant from the struggle. That's the gift. You've seen men who abuse it. Who brew stronger and drink faster. Who shout and fall and wake up in mud. But you're not one of them. You pace yourself. You survive. And yet, you remember once finding a barrel of beer brewed with lavender and honey, left by a merchant. You sipped it in secret alone beneath the stars. You remember that taste. You remember thinking, I didn't know beer could taste like this. Most days it doesn't. Most days it tastes like grain dust and effort. But it doesn't kill you. And in this world, that's enough. You rinse your cup with the last splash from the jug. The dregs are cloudy. You drink them anyway. Outside, the well creaks. Someone draws a bucket. You pretend not to hear. You're in the granary again, this time not for grain. You're not the only one either. The shadows rustle near the walls behind the baskets under the floorboards. And then you see it. Two beady eyes, a flick of a tail, a flash of gray. A rat. Most days you'd chase it away with a stick, but not today. Today you're hungry. You don't leap. You crouch. You wait. One hand slowly reaches for the sack beside you. It holds your trap, a crude box, a loop of string, a smooth stick to hold it up. Bait, a smear of old lard. The rat darts forward, sniffs, hesitates. Then snap. You've caught your dinner. Yes, you're going to eat a rat. And in medieval Europe, that wasn't always cause for alarm. Historians still debate whether rat eating was desperation or delicacy. Some say it was common during sieges, famines, and hard winters. Others argue that in certain regions, especially where large, clean-grain rats were abundant, roasted rat was simply another form of protein no more shocking than rabbit or squirrel. This one is fat. Its belly round. Probably fed well on stored barley. You carry it back carefully, eyes darting in case someone sees and mocks you. But most people won't. They understand. Hunger dulls judgment. And in lean times, a rat is meat. You clean it outside behind the shed. The knife work is quick practiced. Skin off, guts out, tail tossed. You wash it with ale because you don't trust the well water. You rub salt on the body. That helps with the smell. You've done this before. Into the pan it goes. A splash of fat, a little garlic, a few herbs. It sizzles loudly like any meat. The scent is not unpleasant. It's wild, musky, gamey, closer to pigeon than pig. Your stomach grumbles. You flip it, brown on both sides. The bones crackle beneath the weight. You press it with a flat rock to crisp the skin. One child walks in and freezes. Is that a... You nod before she can finish. She blinks, shrugs, and sits down. She'll eat it too. You divide it carefully. There's not much. A few bites each. A leg. A sliver of belly, a nibble of back. You chew slowly, thoughtfully. The texture is chewy. The flavor is bold. Slightly bitter, slightly sweet. Somewhere between squirrel and duck. You've had worse. You remember the siege years ago when the only things left moving in town were dogs and rats. And the dogs disappeared first. People whispered about it but didn't ask questions. They knew. That year you saw a nobleman pay 2 silver for a fat rat. His servant roasted it with plums, called it a delicacy. You still remember that. You've heard other stories. Of monks who refused meat but made exceptions for rats, claiming they were more fish than beast. Of starving farmers who dried rat meat into jerky. Of soldiers who swore rat stew gave them strength. One joke you've heard: if it fits in the pot and doesn't fight back, it's supper. That gets a laugh, but it's also true. The kids chew slowly. One says, "It tastes like chicken." It doesn't, but you nod anyway. Later, when the fire has died down and the bones have been picked clean, you bury them in the ash pit. Quietly, no need to talk about it. You feel full, not satisfied, but no longer hollow. And there's a strange pride that comes with this kind of meal. You've taken something, feared, hated, hunted, and turned it into survival. You didn't waste. You didn't give up. Tomorrow maybe you'll catch a rabbit, maybe a pigeon, maybe nothing at all. But today, you ate a rat, and you're still here. The bread hits the table with a heavy thud. You stare at the crust, dark, dense, and flecked with something that might be grain, or might be dirt, or might be both. The loaf looks more like a stone than something you'd eat. You rap your knuckle against it. It doesn't give. Barley bread. Your daily companion, your dry tormentor. The great barley bread scam, as you've come to call it. Not because it's fake, but because it promises nourishment and delivers mostly chewing. You slice into it with effort. The knife grinds, catching on the crust. Inside, the bread is coarse, gritty, crumbly. You pull off a piece and pop it in your mouth. It's dry. It sticks to your teeth. You chew for a while. There's a crunch that shouldn't be there. It's grit, tiny flakes of stone from the millstones used to grind the barley. Everyone gets it. It wears down your molars, leaves you with bleeding gums and loose teeth. Your grandmother used to say that by the time you've eaten enough bread to survive, you've also eaten enough stone to die. Historians agree that lower-class bread in medieval Europe was often adulterated, sometimes by accident, sometimes on purpose. Sawdust, chaff, even dirt or clay. Anything to stretch the dough to feed more mouths to make a profit. You remember the market baker last year who was fined for adding ground beans and sand into his loaves. Everyone knew. No one stopped buying. He was still the cheapest. Wheat bread is for nobles, for the clergy, for feast days. You've had it maybe twice in your life, soft, white, fragrant. It barely needed chewing. It crumbled between your fingers. You still dream about it. But your bread, it's functional. It fills the belly, if not the soul. You tear off another chunk, dip it in ale to soften it. That helps, a little. You chew again. Grit grinds against your molars. There's a joke passed down through the village. If your bread doesn't bite back, you're eating above your station. You chuckle, then cough, then keep chewing. You've tried to improve it. You've added herbs, onions, bits of leftover grease, once even dried apples. But the flour always wins. The barley is stubborn, coarse, relentless. You remember hearing about maslin, a mix of rye and wheat used in poorer regions. Better than barley, worse than wheat. You envy those people. You'd settle for maslin. Sometimes, if you're lucky, the baker lets the dough rise longer. It makes the loaf slightly lighter. Sometimes it's baked too fast and the middle stays raw. You eat it anyway. One time you burned it on purpose just to have something different. The bitter taste stayed in your mouth for 2 days, but it was something. You glance at the kids. They're chewing too. One has a smear of lard on hers. Another dipped his in thin onion broth. Everyone finds a way. You once met a tanner who toasted his barley bread over the fire until it was black, then crumbled it into soup. He said it tasted like meat. You tried it. It didn't. But it did remind you of smoke, and that was close enough. Your uncle used to say bread was the truest test of faith. If you eat it without complaint, you'll live forever. He died at 40, toothless and grinning. You tear off the heel of the loaf toughest part, the kind that rips at your gums and makes your jaw ache. You chew slowly, you swallow, and then you do it again. Because this is life. This is the foundation. Grain ground, baked, consumed. No feast, no frills, no sweetness. But it keeps you standing. It keeps you strong. It keeps you going back to the table. You brush the crumbs off your tunic, pick a pebble from between your teeth, and reach for another slice. Barley bread. It's not betrayal if it never promised love. You hear the slap of something wet hitting the pastry before you see it. You glance over confused, and then you understand it's eel. Again. It's been stewed, chopped, and tucked neatly into a pie, if you can call anything with bone slime and a face a neat pie. But the crust is there, and the smell is unmistakable. A little fishy, a little muddy, and weirdly buttery. Tonight, you're eating what some in your village consider a luxury, and others call a mistake: eel pie. Eels are slippery little monsters that writhe in the rivers and ditches near town. You've caught them with bare hands, baskets, and once with a sock tied to a stick. They're sneaky, boneless seeming, and they can survive in the mud longer than anything has a right to. But they're food. High in fat, oddly rich, and more filling than fish. You remember being told as a child that if you could get over the texture, they weren't half bad. You didn't believe it then. You sort of do now. The pie crust is rough, made with barley flour and beef fat. It cracks when you cut into it. The inside is gray-brown, slippery, steaming. You fork out a piece. The eel flesh holds its shape better than you expect, tender but firm, not flaking like fish. You taste it, and surprisingly, it's good. Oily, yes, but not unpleasant. Earthy, savory with hints of pepper and onion. Someone seasoned it well. You can taste a splash of ale in the gravy, maybe even a pinch of mustard seed. The crust is dense but soaks up the juices like a sponge. Historians still debate whether eel was everyday food or a fasting day fallback. Some monasteries raised them in ponds and ate them regularly, especially when meat was banned. The church in its wisdom deemed eel to be not meat because of its fish-like form. And so it became a loophole, a holy protein slippery in more ways than one. You remember seeing baskets of eels at market once. They twisted and squirmed, tangling like ropes. A boy stuck his hand in for a dare. One latched on. He screamed. Everyone laughed. You didn't. There's a light joke passed around your table. If it looks like a snake and smells like a fish, call it dinner and chew fast. You chuckle, then chew. You once watched your aunt skin an eel. She nailed its head to a post and pulled the skin off like peeling a glove. It haunted you for weeks. Now it just makes you hungry. Eel wasn't always for peasants. It was royal fare too, served roasted on golden platters stuffed with herbs and dates. You've read about Queen Eleanor's eel feasts. She didn't eat them in pies, but you bet she never cleaned one herself. Tonight you're not thinking about queens. You're focused on the bones. Because here's the thing. Eels have hundreds of tiny bones hidden like splinters. If you chew too fast, you'll know. One catches in your gum sharp and annoying. You dig it out with your nail and keep eating. There's a comfort in the routine of it. Bite, chew, pick, swallow. Your jaw works steadily. Your fingers shine with grease. Your plate empties. The children aren't sure. One eats around the edges. Another just scoops out the crust and leaves the meat. You don't scold them. You did the same once. They'll come around. You remember a winter where eel was the only meat you had. You smoked them over greenwood fires. Let the oil drip onto flatbread, stored the fillets in jars of vinegar. They kept well. Tasted better with age. Like secrets. Tonight's pie disappears faster than expected. Even the crust crumbs are wiped up with bits of barley loaf. No one says much. just chewing, breathing, smiling faintly. Outside, the river flows quietly under the frost. The eels are still there, coiled in the mud, waiting for spring. And when they come back, so will you. It's Friday. You know what that means, no meat. Not because there isn't any, though that's often true, but because the church says so. It's a fast day, one of many. And on fast days, you abstain. But tonight, you're eating porpoise. Or is it beavertail? No one seems entirely sure, and that's part of the game. Because in medieval Europe, fasting didn't mean not eating. It meant not eating meat, at least not technically. So people found loopholes, and fish was the favorite one. But fish got flexible fast. Eels were fine. Everyone accepted that. So were freshwater fish, dried cod, herring, even snails. But then came the strange inclusions: beavertails because they're scaly, porpoises because they lived in water. Even barnacle geese, which some monks swore hatched from driftwood, and thus weren't really birds. Historians still debate whether people truly believed this, or if it was a wink-wink, nudge-nudge kind of theology. But the result was the same. On fast days, you might see someone chewing what looked suspiciously like roast, but insisting it wasn't. Tonight, your stew smells rich, oily. You ladle some into a wooden bowl and peer inside. The meat is dark, firm, and fishy, but not like trout or carp. It's meat that tried very hard to pass as fish and almost made it. You take a bite. It's greasy, slightly sweet, a little like duck, a little like liver, a little like nothing else you've eaten. It might be beaver tail boiled and scraped and stewed with barley and onion. Or maybe it's porpoise meat salted, then braised in spiced wine. Or maybe it's just heavily spiced beef that someone really wanted to pass off as fish. You don't ask. There's a joke. As long as it swims in a pot, it swims in the Lord's eyes. Everyone laughs. Everyone chews. The church calendar was filled with fasts. Wednesdays, Fridays, Lent, Advent, Ember Days, vigils. Some years nearly half your days were fasting days. But that didn't mean going hungry. It meant getting creative. Some nobles dined better on fast days than peasants did on feasting days. Almond milk stews, saffron poached fish, candied eels. You've heard of monasteries that hired professional chefs to craft exquisite fast day feasts complete with gilded sugar sculptures of saints' edible piety. You settle for what's in the pot. You scoop another bite. This time the meat shreds like fish. That's comforting. It smells of pepper and bay leaf. You chew slowly. The broth coats your tongue, warming you from the inside. Someone once told you the Pope himself declared that beaver tail was closer to fish than flesh. You weren't sure what that meant. Still aren't. But it's Friday and you're eating what you're allowed. There's a kind of pride in following the rules technically. Later, someone offers cheese. You hesitate. Is that allowed today? No one knows. No one checks. You eat it anyway. You remember a story: a monk caught roasting bacon on a fast day claimed it was salted herring just cooked too well. The abbot wasn't amused. The monk ate gruel for a month. Your stew is gone now. You scrape the bowl with crusts of bread. The oil has soaked through the wood, staining it a darker brown. You lick your fingers, still unsure what you just ate, but you're full. Outside, the church bell tolls. You bow your head, whisper a silent prayer, and thank the heavens for fish, whatever form it takes. Tomorrow, meat returns. But tonight you've kept the fast, mostly. You've pulled the meat out of storage and it's stiff. It was salted weeks ago, maybe months, and you'd almost forgotten how heavy it is when it comes out of the barrel. The outer layer is caked in white crystals. It smells of brine and something deeper, older, like ocean rocks and damp wood. You thud it down on the table. It lands with a clunk. Tonight, you'll be eating salted meat, but first you have to make it edible again. You drop the chunk, likely beef, though it's hard to tell anymore, into a pot of cold water. It soaks for hours, maybe days if you planned ahead. You change the water every few hours to leach out the salt, to draw it back to life. The meat doesn't thank you. It stays tough, stubborn. You poke it with a knife. still stiff. Salt meant survival. Everyone in your world knew that. You couldn't store meat without it. It kept your bacon, your fish, your precious hunks of mutton from going rancid before winter had finished with the land. Salt was so valuable it could be tax traded, even stolen. And historians agree salt wasn't just seasoning. It was preservation purification power. Some towns were built entirely on salt trade. Wars were fought over it. Your village doesn't have a mine though, so you get what you can through trade luck or generous relatives. You remember the last time salt ran low. Someone tried preserving meat with smoke alone. It worked for a few weeks. Then the smell changed. You never found out who got sick. But you remembered the lesson. Tonight's meat is still soaking. You test it again. Softer now. You drain the pot and start the boil. As the meat cooks, the smell returns not like fresh beef or pork, but something brinier, deeper. A reminder that what you're eating used to be a last line of defense against hunger. You add onions, maybe a bit of barley, a splash of vinegar to cut the salt that's still clinging inside the muscle. The pot simmers. You wait. Once it's tender enough to stab without effort, you serve it. Thick slices, pale at the center with dark rings around the edges. You chew carefully. It's chewy, stringy, still salty. But there's fat in it. Flavor. It sticks to your ribs. You've heard stories of sailors living on salted beef for months at sea, of soldiers packing slabs into bags for long marches, of merchants hauling barrels from coast to city, selling them for more than gold. Salt wasn't just for meat either. It preserved everything: fish, cheese, even vegetables. You've eaten pickled turnips, salted cabbage, dried beans rubbed with ash. It wasn't gourmet. It was preparation. If you didn't salt it, you lost it. There's a light joke you all share. If you can still taste your tongue, add more salt. Tonight, that's almost true. You sip ale between bites just to wash your mouth. One time, someone forgot to soak the meat first. It was like biting into a salted brick. You remember your uncle spitting out a piece and muttering that it tasted like preserved disappointment. Still, even then, you finished your plate. Tonight's better. The texture isn't great, but it's hot. It's food. It keeps the cold out. The children chew slowly, puzzled by the salt. One complains. Another asks why it's so dry and wet at the same time. You smile. That's exactly right. Later, you collect the leftover broth. You'll save it for soup. It's too salty to drink straight, but it's gold and thin gruel. A little goes a long way. You think about the salt barrel in the shed. It's half full. That means you're doing okay. For now. You wonder how long it took for people to learn the trick of it, to draw water from meat, then bring it back, to trade freshness for survival and then fight their way back towards something edible. The stew pot bubbles. The fire pops. Your belly is full, even if your mouth feels like it's been wrung out like a dishcloth. You sip water filtered through linen boiled twice. It tastes flat, but it clears the salt away. You're already thinking about tomorrow. There's still a bit of meat left in the pot. You'll soak it again. You'll make it last. The pig's head lands on the table with a dull, final weight. Its snout is curled, eyes closed, ears stiff from boiling. The skin is slick pale, stretched tight across the skull. You stare at it for a moment before reaching for your knife. This isn't shocking. It's just supper. In medieval Europe, eating the head of an animal, especially a pig's head, wasn't just common. It was expected. It was practical. It was in many ways celebrated. After all, the head held some of the richest, most flavorful bits of meat on the entire animal. The jowls, the cheeks, the tongue, even the brain. You carve carefully. First the cheek, soft and fatty, then the ear, rubbery with cartilage. You've seen it all before. Nothing is wasted. The broth it was boiled in is thick and cloudy, shimmering with a layer of grease. It smells of onion vinegar, maybe a bay leaf. You ladle it over the meat. It soaks into the bread at the edge of your plate, pooling into golden puddles. You take your first bite. The cheek meat melts like butter. It's fatty, unctuous, full of the kind of flavor only slow boiling can unlock. You scoop more, dipping it in mustard, homemade coarse, sharp. The fat coats your tongue. Your teeth find no resistance. Historians still debate whether the pig's head was reserved for feast days or if it was simply a common part of the animal's butchering cycle. In noble courts, a roasted pig's head decorated with apples and herbs was a symbol of opulence, paraded into the hall with fanfare. In cottages like yours, it's boiled, salted, served with dark bread and quiet thanks. You reach for the ear. It crackles between your teeth. A little bland, but the texture is satisfying, rubbery, and crisp at once. Some people love it. Others feed it to the dogs. Tonight, you eat it. You remember your grandmother making brawn, a kind of jelly made from the boiled-down parts of the head set in its own gelatin. It looked like something out of a nightmare, but tasted like something out of a dream. You haven't had it in years. Your neighbor swears by the tongue. He boils it separately, peels off the outer skin, then slices it thin and fries it with onions. You tried it once. It was chewy, rich, oddly elegant. You liked it more than you expected. You work your way toward the eye socket. You pause. Some people eat the eyes, swear by them, say they're full of vitamin-strength truth. You're not one of them. You slice around it. Leave it be. You remember the festival last year when the village pooled resources to roast a whole pig. The head was served last as a prize. You watched the elders dig in first, slurping the cheeks, passing the tongue around like treasure. Children watched with curiosity and fear. You're not afraid anymore. The brain is next. Delicate, silken. You spread it on bread like soft butter. It's rich, too rich. You can't eat much. You pass it along. There's a joke. If you eat the pig's head, you'll think like one. You smile. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Pigs are smart. They survive, just like you. The children are picking over the bones now. One has a jaw in his hand pretending it talks. Another tries to balance the snout on his plate. You let them. It's part of the ritual. Later you'll clean the skull. Maybe hang it by the shed to keep away spirits. Or bury it near the garden. Or toss it into the ash pit with the others. The bones will be boiled again tomorrow, for broth, for stew, for something warm on a cold day. You never waste. You think of all the parts of the pig you've eaten: feet, ears, belly, liver, kidneys, tail. The head is no different. It's just more honest. The meal is winding down. Plates are empty. Bread is crusted with grease. Bellies are full. You lean back, sip your ale, and glance at the head one last time. Its eyes are closed, as if it's still dreaming. The smell from the manor wafts across the field before you even see the smoke. Something rich. Roasting meat. Butter. Maybe even pastry. You close your eyes for a second and let the scent drift into your nose like incense. And then you turn back to your pot of cabbage water. Tonight is another lesson in medieval truth, noble feasts, peasant scraps. You sit at your table with a wooden bowl filled with boiled greens and maybe half a potato. No salt, no fat, just heat and texture. Across the village, just over the ridge, you know the local lord is dining on venison, in wine sauce, white bread, honeyed figs, and for a moment you wonder how you ever thought this was normal. But it is. In medieval Europe, the gulf between noble and peasant meals wasn't just wide, it was a canyon. Historians agree that the elite ate better, fuller, and more extravagantly than most peasants could imagine. Their diets included rare meats, imported spices, sugar almonds, oranges, even peacocks roasted and served in their own feathers. They had courses, goblets, servants' music. You have cabbage, and barley, and sometimes meat. You scoop a limp leaf into your mouth and chew. It tastes like water and dirt. You swallow. You scrape the bottom of the bowl. It's still warm. That counts. Once on a holy day, the manor sent leftovers to the village. A half-chewed ham, a pie crust with nothing in it, a flask of wine with 2 good sips left. People fought over it. You didn't. But your sister came home with a veal bone and chewed it like a prize. There's a joke in town. If you can smell meat, you've already missed your chance to eat it. No one laughs very hard. You've seen the feasts with your own eyes. Not from the table, never that, but through windows, through kitchen doors, from behind hedges. You watched a servant once slice cheese into cubes. Cheese, in cubes. He threw the rinds away. You would have eaten those rinds with joy. Your neighbor worked in the manor kitchens for a while. He told stories of capons stuffed with eggs and herbs, of sweetmeats coated in almond cream, of white bread so soft you could squeeze it into a ball. He lost his job for stealing sugar. He said it was worth it. You remember the time you tried to make noble bread. You sifted your barley flour 3 times, added water, lard, even a splash of milk. It baked into a dense rock. You ate it anyway. Tonight, as you sip your cabbage broth and tear your barley bread, you feel no bitterness, just distance. Like the nobles are from another planet eating under moons you'll never see. You once heard that Queen Isabella refused to eat anything touched by firewood that also touched peasants' pots. You don't know if it's true, but it feels right. Your food isn't poisoned by extravagance. It's humble. It's honest. It's repetitive, but it doesn't lie. Still, sometimes you dream. You imagine a long table laid with linen silver knives, dishes from distant lands. You're there. You sit. You eat roast duck. You sip spiced wine. You smile. Then you wake up and your tongue still tastes like boiled cabbage. You finish your meal. It wasn't enough. It rarely is, but it was yours. You wipe the bowl with crust, lick your fingers, rinse with a trickle of ale. Across the field, the manor's lights glow behind colored glass. Someone laughs. You wonder what they're laughing at. Then, you blow out your candle. You can tell by the smell that something's wrong. The meat has been hanging in the cool part of the cottage for a few days, too many maybe. It was salted once a little. Then someone forgot, or hoped it would be cold enough, or just didn't want to waste it. And now it's here, slick to the touch, slightly green in patches, soft in places that should be firm. You look at it. You look at the pot. You look at the spice jar. You're going to cook it anyway. This is spoiled meat, spiced and served, and in medieval Europe it wasn't unusual. When you can't afford to throw food away, you don't. You mask it, boil it, spice it, eat it before it eats you. You slice away the worst of the surface, those gray slimy bits that come off like wet cloth. The smell doesn't get better, so you rinse it with vinegar, then ale, then vinegar again. It still smells wrong, but less wrong, and that's good enough. Into the pot it goes. You add onions, garlic, a handful of dried herbs, a heavy shake of pepper, a pinch of mustard, some vinegar, a splash of old wine, everything you have, everything that might fight the rot. The broth simmers dark and sharp. The scent rises like a warning, but also like a challenge. Historians still debate how common this practice really was. Some argue most people knew when to walk away from bad meat. Others point out that seasoning-heavy medieval recipes weren't just for taste, they were damage control. In an age without refrigeration, spices weren't just flavor, they were defense. And if you were wealthy, you had access to cloves, cinnamon, nutmeg, saffron. Enough spice to make anything taste like something else. That pork you're eating might be 2 weeks old. You'd never know. You don't have cloves, but you have pepper, and vinegar, and hope. You let the stew cook for hours, low and slow, until the meat stops resisting the spoon, until the color evens out, until the scent is almost appetizing. Almost. You serve it with bread, the dark kind, the kind that's more bran than flour. It helps soak the broth. It keeps your mouth too busy to question what it's chewing. You take the first bite, and it's not bad, it's not good either, but it's warm and salty, the texture's fine, the flavor is spiced, familiar enough to quiet the alarms. You chew slowly, watch your family. No one says anything. They eat, they trust you. You hope you were right. One of the children asks, "Is this the stew from last time?" You nod, just with more pepper. They nod back. Everyone keeps eating. You once heard a story about a cook who layered meat in spices so thick the bones came out white, but the diners were thrilled. Another tale tells of meat so spoiled it crawled until it hit the pot. Then it stopped crawling. You laughed to yourself. A quiet laugh, a necessary one. Tomorrow you'll watch your family closely. For signs, for stomach aches, for complaints. But tonight, they're full. You scrape your bowl. The broth is oily, rich, sharp. The spice clings to your tongue. You drink a little ale. It washes most of it away. Outside, it's snowing. Quiet, cold. Inside, you're warm. Not safe, maybe, but warm. You stack the bowls, rinse them with snow, wipe the pot with stale bread. Tomorrow, if no one's sick, you'll call it a victory. And if someone is, you'll call it a lesson. The fire is low, your belly is full, not completely, not comfortably, but enough. Enough to sleep without waking up hollow. Enough to dream. You sit quietly, hands resting on your knees as the last embers glow orange in the hearth. Around you, the house settles, creaking rafters, a cough in the corner, someone shifting under a wool blanket. Outside, the wind sighs through the trees. The pig's bones are in the pot. The bread is covered with a cloth. The barley has been measured for morning. And tonight, as you let the warmth soak into your hands, you find yourself wondering, why did they eat all of this anyway? The gruel, the blood porridge, the fermented fish, the dried barley bread that chews like gravel, the weed salads, the maggoty cheese, the rats, the turnips, the pig's heads, the head-scratching pies filled with raisins and meat and cinnamon, and maybe regret. Why? Because they had to. Because survival wasn't a choice, it was a craft, a negotiation, a game played against weather-class religion, war parasites, rot, and time. Because food didn't come from markets and menus. It came from mud, from instinct, from luck. It came from whatever you could trap, grow, scavenge, borrow, steal, ferment, or reheat for the third time. Because taste wasn't king, calories were. Because hunger was a guest that never left the room. You reach for the last crust of barley bread and bite into it slowly. It's stale, a little moldy at the edge. You pick off the fuzz and keep chewing. It's still food. It still matters. In the towns and cities, they used laws to control bread prices. In the manors, they fed feasts to remind themselves they were better. In the monasteries, they fasted and called it holy. But for most people, people like you, food was just the next hurdle. Eat to work, work to eat. Hope to survive long enough to do it again. You remember your grandmother saying that a bowl of thin soup tasted best when someone shared it without asking for anything in return. You think about that every time you boil bones. There's a lightness in the room now, a quiet. Someone snores softly. You stand, stretch, and stoke the coals one last time. The fire snaps gently. The shadows flicker. And in that flicker, you see it all again, the steaming gruel, the sour ale, the warm rat meat, the impossible pies, the beetle crunch bread, the bowl of weeds, the salted beef that needed a week to become chewable, the garum-soaked barley, the fried mushroom surprise that didn't kill you this time, 1,000 meals, 100 half-spoiled miracles, a lifetime of eating what no one today would dare touch. But you dared, because you had to. Because you were a peasant, a monk, a soldier, a mother, a child, a cook, a worker, a survivor. Because taste is a modern luxury. Back then, food was endurance. And tonight, like so many nights before, you endured.